Camille Zamora. Let me welcome you to Cultural Attaché. And I'm happy to discuss with you Pauline García Viardot. And I have to say, before we get too far into this, my French is absolutely pathetic, so my apologies in advance.
Pauline and I both forgive you.
Good, I appreciate that. So I watched your commencement speech at Juilliard, and you used an expression that I had never heard, which was in bocca al lupo. You know, which for those who don't know is into the wolf's mouth, right? So what prompted you to go into the wolf's mouth, you know, on this project? And how did you first become aware of Pauline García Viardot?
You know, I feel so fortunate because so many of, well, maybe this is true of all of us. So much of, I feel so much of my life has been determined by happy accidents. Also just good conversations with friends. And in this particular case, I think I was in the middle of a gig actually with a dear friend, Adriana Zavala, beautiful, beautiful mezzo-soprano, who is actually, I believe she's the voice professor at Yale now, and just a glorious singer, artist, entrepreneur. And we were nerding out about, you know, just music, the sort of highways and byways, and particular composers that we love. And we both said, you know, Pauline García Viardot, this person who is not very often performed, but I think we both found her, you know, I actually first heard of her through a recording of Cecilia Bartoli. I feel like Cecilia did some of the sort of first uncovering of her music. And this was several years back, and Adriana and I both said, you know, we have to find more of her stuff. She had a beautiful habanera for two voices that Adriana and I had performed in a recital, and we said, you know what, let's see what else is out there. We literally went into the Google machine and started sort of poking around, and lo and behold, it actually turned out that very year, Harvard University had collected from a private collection this previously lost manuscript, this score that was Pauline's original score of The Last Sorcerer, this amazing piece. We like to call it sort of an eco-feminist fairy tale in operatic form. And I don't know that that's the language that Pauline herself would have used to describe it, circa 1867, but I do believe that was sort of her intent. It's a piece that is about the sort of often ignored voices. In particular, in this case, it's sort of the fairy folk who have not really been given their due. And it's about elevating those voices that are too often left kind of outside of conversations. And it's about taking care of the earth and sort of restoring the natural order.
Right. And unseen and unheard for 150 years at this point. So when you're evaluating the score and you're looking through it, what was there an aha moment where you go, this is actually not just a discovery of a lost work, it's a discovery of a lost good work?
You know, thank you for asking that, because I do like to quickly sort of say, you know, this piece initially attracted us because we were sort of on a kind of, you know, I will say sort of a feminist mission to find a piece that had not gotten its due by a woman who really was reportedly one of the most incredible intellects of the latter part of the 19th century. So we were sort of on an intellectual mission, but as soon as we started delving into these melodies, they just took over. They are so innovative and I love, I'm a fan of quoting people wiser than myself. And in particular, Leonard Bernstein has a great quote about tremendous compositions, which is that they are at once surprising and inevitable. And her music has that sense of being sort of arresting and sort of shakes us up, but it also just sounds so right and so organic. And yeah, we fell in love with this score, which we actually originally were introduced to in manuscript form. So we commissioned a transcript of it to sort of be the official piano vocal score that we would work from. And it took us a while to find the time in our schedules, but we eventually got together with a group of friends, including the great Eric Owens, who gave us the title role, and wonderful Manhattan Girls Chorus, led by Michelle Osterly, who also was one of our executive producers, and the great Marlon Berry, producer and recording engineer, gave us our soundscape there in the Academy of Arts and Letters in New York City, and we just had a great time.
One of the videos that I saw, believe it was a video, I think a promotional video for the album, you mentioned that this work could stand on equal footing with 19th century romantic operas.
I do feel so.
Yeah, so this you found the work in 2017. The album came out in 2019. So there's been 6 years sort of exposure that other performing arts institutions have now had as a result of the work that you've done. Have you recognized any greater appreciation of her and her work as a result of this endeavor?
What a lovely question. Thank you. I do like to think that it's sort of helped to get the word out. Full disclosure, I do think our ears are trained to hear opera with orchestra, which is, of course, the ideal. Now, in Pauline's life, she worked with the resources that she had at her disposal. That was her piano with her fingers on the keyboard and her students. And so her piece really wasn't afforded that full production treatment. 2 years later, apparently, it did get a theatrical release, as it were, in Weimar, I believe, and it was with full orchestra, but apparently they were under-rehearsed and it wasn't a great orchestration. So all of that to say, I do dream of a scenario where eventually we can truly present it with full orchestra, and that will give us a bit more of the grand soundscape that you expect when you hear sort of late romantic opera. That said, we're going to find out when we put it on its feet next week in Beverly Hills at the Wallis Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts. We're going to really see what it feels like to actually give it a production in a theater and take it from start to finish.
And are you going to be at least doing a video of that so that you have a sense of what the result is?
We are really sort of pulling it together with kind of the lean resources that we have, Pauline style, we're working with what we have. So, dream scenario, we have the full video HD budget. At this point, we probably will just have sort of an archival video, but we can already say that, people are really responding so beautifully to it. We have wonderful artists in the cast. I really think it's going to be something that's really compelling. And I will share that one of the sort of treats of the experience is that, working with a limited budget, we are, really turning to the community, which, again, even if we'd had a massive budget, I like to think we would have had the wisdom to be hyper local in this endeavor. We are, bringing our international glorious cast from, all corners of the globe, but we are working actually with school kids locally to sort of tell them about this work, to get them excited about it. And in particular, Savannah High School in Anaheim, which is a Title I school, 90% Hispanic and Latin youth. They are, as we say, the creators of our world, which is to say they are literally our set designers. So it's their beautiful artwork, which is right now in 2 dimensions on paper, but is going to be projected into the beautiful Jewel Box Theater at the Wallis. And they are the ones who sort of are creating this magical forest. The arc of the show is that it sort of goes from a dystopian kind of ruined forest to a forest that has been restored to natural beauty. And this amazing group of high school kids have just, really created this arc forest, this forest that looks, at first toxic and ruined and hopeless, and really by the end of the show is something that is so beautiful. And so, again, necessity being the mother of invention, we started off saying, okay, we don't have a budget for sets, and then we realized, wow, we have something actually much more exciting, which is the imaginations of our young students, and they are the ones who are creating this world. And I do think it's particularly moving to us because this is actually the first time these young people have ever been involved in an opera in any way. They've never attended an opera. Most of them have actually never attended a live performance of any kind. And they're going to be coming to this glorious Wallis Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts in Beverly Hills. And they're going to be walking into this world that they themselves have designed and created.
And watching a much shorter work than the Magic Flute, which is normally the way they get introduced.
Exactly. Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I think in this hopefully post-COVID world, as we sort of emerge back into, the wonders of live performance, I know for one, my attention span has taken a hit. And I think there's nothing wrong with looking at these sort of leaner models. And this show, in fact, is about 1 hour and 15 minutes. So I think it's a fantastic introductory work.
Or half an hour shorter than the first act of the Magic Flute.
Exactly. Not that we're counting. But
not that we're counting, but facts are facts.
Exactly.
You know, the world has undergone a lot of change since you first discovered this work and since you recorded it. And I'm wondering if you think there are things that resonate more with you now about, Le Dernier Sorcier than did when you first started looking at it or first going over the new transcription that you got.
I will say I think a lot about this industry because it's so beloved to me. I mean, I grew up in Texas and in Mexico, dreaming, frankly, of being able to make music for a living, and certainly dreaming of opera. I actually, my folks had never particularly been to the opera, but I was lucky enough to have great public school music, and I kept stretching my voice and finding that it was able to do these wild things. And I just sort of fell in love with this art form, and was lucky enough to eventually end up in New York at Juilliard. And I love this industry, and I love my colleagues, and I love the work. I really do think that there's something about the unamplified voice and about this great, wonderful animal that is opera, that brings together music and design and dance and composition and acting and the greatest melodies in the world. There's something magical about it. And I think even there's something sort of shamanistic healing about it. But the fact of the matter is the delivery systems can be problematic, and it's nobody's intention. I mean, I think that's the hard thing about systems. They're hard to dismantle because they are no one's intention. But the fact of the matter is a lot of people aren't invited in, or they don't feel themselves to be invited in. And so I think, I'm particularly compelled by models that allow for the highest level of sort of international operatic talent and all of that stuff that we call excellence, but also the most radical sense of welcome, and of mutual welcome, of mutual respect, and of honoring the creativity that is, again, hyper local, even as we bring in these glorious artists from around the world. I think, I think that's a really special thing to think about. I think all of the great companies are certainly trying to do that. And I think there's a lot of amazing innovation happening right now in our opera world. But I think, yes, and the more that we can go in that direction, the better. And I think that, this piece, it represents a lot of really important opportunities. It's an opportunity to obviously honor a voice that was not given its due. Pauline was besties with everyone from, Charles Dickens to Wagner, with whom she sat down and played duets at the piano. She and Chopin co-composed repertoire. She was I think she was the first Dalida for Camille Saint-Saëns. She was this iconic figure, but, I certainly, received multiple music degrees at my wonderful alma mater of Juilliard without ever hearing about this person. And, I think, again, I believe the tide has turned. I think there's a lot more awareness and a lot more hunger to find and amplify voices that have not been given their due. But the opportunities in this moment are tremendous, and we ignore them at our peril. And so for me, I think there's that whole other layer, aside from just the pleasure principle of enjoying this work. There's a whole other layer, I think, of it, I'll say urgency right now in this production, that we really want to involve the community. We really want people to be thinking outside, the standard canon. And I think, I think the opportunity to do it with this wonderful, yummy piece is a joy.
Well, it's interesting because I looked at the website for this beautiful, yummy piece, as you just referred to it, and it said it was hailed as a treasure by the likes of Franz Liszt and Johannes Brahms and Clara Schumann. Was it just the fact that it was written by a woman was the reason it was relegated to the dustbin of a private collection?
Thank you for that question. This is something we've actually been talking about. We've been zooming in, and then last week I was in California and Anaheim, and had the joy of visiting with our kids, these students who, again, just brass tacks. I mean, the fact of the matter is these kids they're brilliant. They are the future. They also are living without a lot of the access, and frankly, there's real present and pressing issues in these kids' lives, like food insecurity. And this is in our beautiful Southern California, Orange County, where you wouldn't think that's a daily reality for people, and yet it is. So the fact of the matter is these young people are living with a lot of difficulties, but they are so alive to the wonder of this work and precisely this conversation of, you know, what was it? What was it in 1867 for Pauline García Viardot? Why has her work maybe not made it to us? And interestingly too, not to get too sort of meta, but the work that she also composed, you know, we have this wonderful lead character sung by the glorious Monica Yunus, beautiful soprano and my fellow Sing for Hope co-founder, but a beautiful artist, 10-year principal artist at the Metropolitan Opera and illustrious career. And she's bringing to life this star character of Stella. And it's interesting, Stella, star, is herself an unexpected heroine for 1867, because she basically explains to her dad, listen, I'm not interested in being married off for wealth. That's not my thing. And so she already turned her back on what frankly would have been the avenue for social power for, you know, most European women circa 1867. So I think, again, why did Pauline's work, why did it present itself in its debut in her living room with her students and herself at the piano, as opposed to at the Palais Garnier? You know, these are social questions. I think we know the answer, but I also think, you know, I think it's waiting for our scholarship. It's waiting for our study, that question. You know, perhaps a more recent question might be, why did we wait until 2016 for the Metropolitan Opera to do its second opera, the first having been in 1908? That's a long...
The second opera written by a woman.
Excuse me, second opera written by a woman.
because they only just did...
Not that the other operas don't count, they count, but
right.
You know,
but...
our bread and butter has not been, you know, operas written by women, and I think, you know, I think it's an interesting thing to look at, and to look at and always say immediately, as we're saying with our students, who's not being heard today,
right,
and why, you know,
right. With her being a woman, do you think she wrote with a better understanding of female voices than male composers might have?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you. That's such a wonderful question. Part of the joy of her vocalism and of all of her sort of pedagogy is that she was part of this hot moment in European vocal history, which is that she was the daughter of one of the great voice teachers and singers, actually two of them, but her father in particular was a very famous voice teacher. Her brother was a famous voice teacher. Her sister was Maria Malibran, who was the great diva of the age, died in a tragic accident at the age of 28, but she sort of grew up surrounded by vocalism. So to your point, one of the things I was mentioning the other day, our wonderful director of education at Sing for Hope, with whom I'm co-directing this piece, Sharon Pirtle, the two of us had this little funny moment the other day. We were like, wait, what other professional singers have written operas? Because it's interesting. Well, actually, I should say, in Long Beach Opera, I just saw, I think in today's New York Times, the wonderful Kate Soper has just, who's a beautiful singer. She has just premiered after a COVID delay, one of her wonderful operas. So there are some, and actually Kamala Sankaran is a beautiful vocalist and composer. But I do know that a lot of our great composers, we don't think of them necessarily as practitioners, vocal practitioners as well. So there is absolutely a sense of, you know, just singing these roles into the voice, you feel that like, oh, this is written by someone who really understands how the voice works.
Right. You don't listen to Wagner and think, oh, that's somebody who can sing himself, because he wouldn't put singers through a lot of that.
Well, I think I do agree with that. I can go on a whole nerding off tangent on that. I won't go into too much detail, but I had the honor of being able to spend some time once in Bayreuth, and hearing his operas in that theater makes you rethink his vocalism, because it's interesting that the orchestra is submerged under the stage, and there's less of a competition between this massive Wagnerian orchestra in the sort of architecture of his theater. But that's another story. So I like to think of him and Pauline sitting at the piano playing duets, which they did.
Yeah, I would love to have been a fly on the wall when that happened.
What a trip. And apparently she was such an amazing human being. Apparently she just was the funniest, sort of kindest, wildest thinker, you know, an unbelievable teacher who changed lives, amazing parent. And she and Turgenev, who wrote the libretto, had this incredible lifelong relationship. while she was there with her husband. So question mark about all of that, but they were this sort of happy, harmonious family for I think something like 40 years.
Which means he got to be at her side when she took to the stage and she sang Bellini's Norma, or she sang Rosina in The Barber of Seville, or Desdemona in Rossini's Othello. And I'm wondering, how much do you think what people know of her is limited to her work as an opera singer, and how much the exposure people will now get to this work will come closer to cementing her reputation as a composer?
I think that's really fascinating. I mean, again, I give my hats off to Cecilia Bartoli for many reasons, but again, she was the first person who I heard sing this music on one of her wonderful song albums. I think it was Habanera, one of these wonderful little sort of salon recital pieces, and she records it so beautifully. So, the music is sort of out there. I will share, I think, again, I'm interested to know what people think when they hear this music, because there is a little bit of a tendency to sort of say, oh, it's charming and it's petite and it's pretty. We tend to react to fairy tales in that way anyways. It is short. To me, its brevity is a virtue. But again, I think the fact that we're not hearing it with grand orchestra does sort of make us feel like, oh, there's a little, it's a little bit of a small scale work. I'll admit, I think my radar was up for this, but I did notice in some of the some of the reviews that the recording got, they were certainly all very positive, but some of them sort of said, oh, it's a charming work. And I feel like, I'm defensive on Pauline's behalf, and that I want her to be sort of taken as a really serious artist. And I do agree that there's absolutely, it's literally a fairy tale. So there's this sort of whimsical, childlike aspect to the piece. But I feel like it does one of the hardest things that art can do, which is it addresses very serious issues with a lightness of touch. And to me, that there's something very, very masterful about that.
And was the narration that is heard in the recording, was that something that she wrote to be performed without music, or was that something you felt you needed to add for clarity?
I wrote that based on Turgenev's libretto, and also I should mention the scholarship of a wonderful professor out of University of Calgary, Nicholas Seculin, brilliant man and such a generous scholar. When we found Adriana Zavala and I found this access to this score, we just started madly sort of Googling and trying to find, has anybody written about this? And he wrote a wonderful, slender little sort of treatise on it, and sort of explaining aspects of it. And so pulling together these various sources, I, for the album, created this narration to sort of frame it storybook style. And because we had such a limited time to record this album, we didn't have time to do the spoken dialogue, to coach our international cast on the French spoken dialogue. And we said, you know what, we're going to bring in the glorious Trudy Styler. I was fortunate enough to have performed with her and Sting, her fabulous husband.
I've heard of him. He might have I think he has a career.
He's done fine. He's done fine. So yes, I knew her, and I said, Trudy, will you come and be our storyteller and weave this tale? And we sort of framed it so that in between every sung number, there is this wonderful storytelling voice. And what's fun is actually at the Wallis, the wonderful Monique Coleman. Many people know her because she's the star of the Disney High School Musical franchise, and she's many more things besides. And she's our storyteller for our performance next week.
Right. Now, we were talking a little bit about the fact that the Met has only done 2 operas, composed by women. A lot of performing arts institutions are starting to pay more attention to works by women that have been neglected. I mean, you certainly see that with Florence Price, for instance, or for artists who are people of color. Are you confident that what is happening now is the beginning of a deeper dive that is going to take place, or do you fear that this might be a knee-jerk reaction to the moment?
Well, goodness, I mean, I feel, we can only look at our own work, really. And in a way, we all have so much work to do. And, you know, I speak from a position of tremendous privilege. It's interesting for me, you know, I grew up with the most incredible teaching and the most incredible educational resources, and both my parents were teachers. It's interesting, I'm one generation removed from someone who sort of made that leap. My dad was the first person in his family who went to college, and that was, you know, I feel like I sort of saw what that was for a person to kind of leap. You know, it's quite a thing to leapfrog opportunity-wise from what your parents were able to do. There are a lot of repercussions to that. And, you know, I think that we all know that there are so many people, again, who just have not been invited into this wonderful thing we call classical music, and this wonderful thing we call opera. And so, yeah, I mean, it's high time. It's beyond high time. There is no such thing as an excellent organization anywhere that's not diverse. I mean, all of the studies have shown us that truly great teams are diverse teams. That's where true creativity happens. And I think, you know, what I wonder sometimes is, you know, how much damage has been done, and you know, we're still looking at a world where we have, you know, the greatest performing arts institution in the world, the Metropolitan Opera. It's certainly the largest performing arts budget in the world, arguably in many ways the most influential, and it literally shares, you know, essentially a street corner with some of the toughest projects in our great country. And I think what that means is that you have incredible people come from all over the world to come to this theater, and, you know, right there, Juilliard, catty corner to all of it. It's such a joy. And I feel so fortunate. I'm very, very loyal to Juilliard, which is such a special place. But we also have to look at the fact is, you know, what does it mean for, you know, certainly when I was there as a singer and there practicing my scales day after day, hour after hour, in a city where the majority of children cannot tell you what a piano is. They can't point to a piano. They've never touched a piano. And again, nobody's intention and no one individual's fault, but that's what's tricky about systems. Systems are difficult to dismantle precisely because they aren't the result of one evil act. So I think, you know, this idea of just trying new things, you know, our organization, Sing for Hope, we like to say it's sort of an arts Peace Corps. And one of the first things that we did that kind of brought us a lot of sort of eyeballs was that we started putting artist designed pianos on the streets. And this was a partnership with City Hall. It was a crazy thing. Monica Eunice and I, luckily, we didn't know what we didn't know, and we kind of blazed in to City Hall. We were able to get a sort of an audience with the wonderful cultural commissioner at the time under Mayor Bloomberg, Kate Levin, and we said, listen, we have this idea, artist design pianos all over the 5 boroughs, especially in places like the Bronx Grand Concourse and, you know, East New York, and places that maybe don't have a piano. And one of the things that was most moving to us that first year was, I remember Carolyn Walker, this wonderful community leader in Brooklyn, saying, you know, most of our kids have never seen a piano, and they've certainly never touched one. And to see kids, you know, just starting to make music, that is a world in which opera and every art form can thrive.
It's funny because you're talking about the idea that there are all these, you know, institutions that have been built up, you know, that take time to dismantle. What about the institutions we're facing now that want to dismantle the progress that's been made? As a citizen artist and somebody who thinks that and believes, as I do, that education in the arts is of paramount importance, what is the prognosis for expanding arts education in a country where we're now being told that you can't discuss certain characteristics about people? You can't have books on library shelves or in teachers' rooms unless they're vetted by a panel that who knows what their you know, criteria is for letting these works happen. I mean, it seems like we're building a new form of censorship in this country, and I think that we'll never have good arts education as long as there's going to be censorship like that.
It's inconceivable to me. It really is. And I think that's actually part of the problem, is that, you know, our algorithms and our educational systems, I suppose, to some extent, have ensured that we tend to be surrounded by our echo chambers. I will frankly share with you that I do not know a human being who doesn't believe that kids should have free access to libraries. So I think part of the problem is we've all cordoned ourselves off from people who are not like-minded, and that is a problem. I need to know these people. We all need to know these people. And, you know, I think across the aisle discourse is something that we have lost. You know, we've all seen the way that the algorithms cordon us off. And, you know, it's so shocking to me, and that in itself is part of the problem. This came from somewhere. You know, this idea of closing children's libraries. And I read an article the other day, and it was some sort of like lovely book. I can't remember offhand what it was, but it was like a lovely book being read by an elementary school kid, and the kid, you know, had it taken away from them midstream. First of all, yay, a kid reading. Wow. And second of all, what is happening? You know, again, to refer to the old social media soup, but I saw a meme the other day that sort of says it all, which is they showed these two kids side by side, one holding up a book, the other holding up a gun. And it said one of these children is holding up something that is very dangerous and therefore is against the law. And it wasn't the gun.
Of course not.
You know, so I think, you know, I think that we have terrible, terrible problems. And I think we've demonized each other to such an extent that it seems that, I don't know, we have two sides that are dug in. I do think, ironically, part of the thing about music is that it does allow us to see each other as human before we ask, you know, what side of the debate are you on? And that I do think that's tremendously important, you know, the opportunity to come together somehow as humans before we get into it about who votes for whom. You know, I imagine, well, I just think that most people who will come to this opera, chances are we have similar feelings about censorship. Chances are we vote similar ways. That in itself is a problem. You know, we need to not just preach to the converted. We need to have people who think radically different from us. And I think it's really concerning. It's really concerning that we have lost those opportunities. You know, I sometimes think of, you know, may they both rest in peace, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Scalia, you know, used to go to the opera together. They would vote against each other during the week and then go see an opera at the Kennedy Center on the weekends. There is something to be said for that concept of worthy rivals, and at least being able to engage in dialogue with someone who's not like-minded. And I think having lost that, and I think it's gotten worse during COVID, that is worrisome.
Yeah, it would be nice if we could teach people how to listen again.
Beautifully said.
Well, speaking of beautifully said, finding quotes, you know, by Pauline García Viardot is next to impossible. Because there's not that much that's been recorded that she said, but I did find one.
Oh, let's hear it.
She said, "There is nothing more interesting, nothing more moving than to feel you have an entire audience in the hollow of your hand, laughing when you laugh, weeping when you sob, and shaking with anger." As an artist and a director, I assume you absolutely agree with her. But is there a special satisfaction that you get in seeing and hearing how audiences respond to this work?
Sorry about that. You know, I have to say, first of all, what's going to be cool is that I'm going to experience my first live audience with this work next week. So we'll have to have another session. What I can say is that, you know, what I'm hearing right now is that having gone through this in the recording process with one cast, many of our cast members are the same from the recording into this production as well. It was great fun for me to hear what people had to say as, you know, sort of being the first recorded artists of these roles. So now I'm getting to hear, you know, from Monica Yunus, who sings the role of Stella, okay, wow, this is really wild, this aspect of this aria. Or, you know, to hear a little bit from Karim Suleiman about, wow, you know, this role of Perla Papin is witty and unexpected in this way. So I'm hearing from the different artists their experience of it. I have yet to hear what the audience thinks. So I think let's circle back next week.
Well, I plan on being there, so we can circle back hopefully in person.
I love that.
Thank you for your time. Are you all right with my posting this interview on our YouTube channel?
Sure, I'm honored. And I thank you so much for such thoughtful questions and just being, you know, an incredible cultural advocate. You know, your voice is really important to us. And I think, you know, they're just, it's a very interesting moment to sort of try to shine light in unexpected corners, and you're really doing that. So thank you.